Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, the whole team gets together to reflect about the past year and plot about our future. In our roundtable conversation, find out what's changed us as gardeners, lessons we've learned, and our perceptions about what gardening really means. We'll also give you the inside story on what we do, along with philosophy to guide newcomers to the path we've traveled. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
Well, welcome to our program. This is a very special tradition that we do every year with Central Texas Gardener. We assemble the Central Texas Gardener crew, and they join us for a discussion about many different kinds of topics, typically a little garden reflection going on at the end of the year. And this year we're going to be focusing on change in the garden and finding balance. Joined, of course, by Daphne Richards, Trisha Shirey, and John Dromgoole. And I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves a little more fully, but I think you are probably familiar with all of the gang here. But let's start with Daphne. Daphne, please make us a brief introduction of yourself and tell me one thing that you're thinking about in terms of change for your garden this year.
Well, I am the county horticulturist with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service here for Travis County, and I've been here about 3 years now. And one of the things that I'm adjusting to after having moved to the desert is when we do get rain here, and I know we've been in a drought, but when we do get rain, it's a lot at one time. And so I'm dealing with issues of drainage in my garden, and I've planted some things where they get too much water certain times of the year and not enough in others, so I'm trying to deal with that.
Okay, that's always a good change and balance topic for us as well. And I forgot to mention that we were joined by one other guest, so you might occasionally see Augie, who is our Central Texas Gardener mascot, joining us, and Augie's presiding down below here. Trisha, please introduce yourself a little bit, and then again, talk about what you're thinking about in the garden.
Well, I'm Trisha Shirey, and my official title is Director of Flora and Fauna at Lake Austin Spa Resort, and I've been there for 28 years now in charge of the garden. So it's there's been a lot of change since I've been there, and also in my home garden. And one of the things I'm doing is really planting more and more edibles. I'm actually planting edibles with flowers and in containers and trying to put in as many as I can, and also at home because I'm sharing my harvest with so many people now that it just seems more practical, and if I'm going to be using the water, I want to make sure it's an edible crop.
And that's a topic I know that a lot of people would love for us to explore more fully. John?
Well, I'm John Dromgoole, and I'm the owner and founder of The Natural Gardener, an organic gardening headquarters for sure. And so what's new? You know, these lack of rains that have been going on is something of concern to us, and it may not really be long lasting, but we want to learn ahead of time. And so we're beginning to shape our gardens a little bit differently. We always made our mounds like that, and we've been trying to make the mounds like this to catch as much water as we can. So we're learning from the Native Americans from New Mexico how to live and garden without water.
Yeah, and I think then when I think about the changes in my own gardening space as well, last year's drought is still lingering in my memory and really weighing on me in a lot of ways. And I've been thinking about, you know, the plant palette we use and the kinds of beds we create. Mm-hmm. And my notion is, you know, let's look west to plants that have survived drought situations. We can find lots of inspiring, you know, kind of ecosystems and plant palettes. We just look to the hill country, maybe the western edge of the hill country, use those plants in the garden. And those are the things that I'm really paying attention to right now. And those are the kinds of changes I'm making, is making kind of either canyon beds with a little more mulch and leafy plants, or hilltop plants beds with more gravelly soils and grasses and succulents and agaves and things like that. So those are some of the adjustments I've been making as well. Mm-hmm. Let's dig a little more deeply into this whole topic of change, because you know, one of the gifts of gardening is change, being present for the change that happens every season in the garden. but also making as we grow as gardeners, we adjust. Let's talk about some other change topics here, other things that you're working on in terms of adjustments you're making in the garden or changes that you think need to be made.
Well, absolutely. As you said, we need to adjust to a drier climate. Times when we get, different times of year when we get our rain, we're not getting it the same times of year we always have. It's kind of moved a few months back. So adjusting to that is important. And I think when we do that, it's very important for people to be familiar with their soil type. You talked about using these fabulous plants from the West, and I was just recently out, I did the Formula run at the Formula One racetrack, and I had to stop and take lots of pictures of the soil that they have to deal with out there because it's huge clods of clay this big. So it's hard to adjust some of those Western plants to that type of soil, so we need to work with that.
All right, yeah, that's where the granite sand comes in, I think. Trisha?
Well, I think with every garden, there's always change, and that's something it's difficult for novice gardeners to get their heads around because they think you plant a garden and you're done, and it's just not that way. Sometimes it's colder, sometimes it's warmer in the winter. I know in my own garden, I have had a lot of shade to begin with, but now the trees have grown, so I have even more shade. So I'm having to change things and move things because they're in too much sun. So the gardens really, by definition, are just constant change.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, John, your point I think is really important. We're having to adjust to not just the typical change that gardeners deal with, which is season to season, but we have seen as gardeners, I think all of us have witnessed climate change happening right before our very eyes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you know, there's some disputes on that, and yet what I'm witnessing, all of us that are outside see it better than folks who are in offices. We experience it frequently because we have to water at certain times and make our way through these concerns about gardening. Is this something we can continue with in the future? Many folks know that I like vegetable gardening a lot. You know, I like growing food in the traditional way and in the new square foot garden way. And so, you know, we're focused around teaching. And one of the things to teach is how to sustain yourself, how to grow enough vegetables, not just tomatoes and peppers and okra, but a wider variety of vegetables that kind of complement the diet. And so as a teaching facility, we look at some of these things. One of the things that's very exciting are grafted tomatoes. We tried a batch last year that we got out of Canada because it was the only resource, and they didn't fare well here. And so this year we got some more in July and planted them up. And I mean, there wasn't a yellow leaf on that plant. They grew very vigorously, and I mean, sometimes we get yellow leaves on our tomatoes, and there wasn't one. Nice and green, grew quickly. It was Homestead and Heat Wave that were grafted onto them. And the tomatoes are just hanging off right now. I mean, there's something to this grafting idea. It's been done around the world, but if it helps us produce more vegetables in our garden, then I'm all for it. It's not GMO, it's not really hybridizing. It's using a new technique. And I'm really excited about it and look forward to trying it some more to see what's going to work for us.
You know, I'm glad we're on the topic of food because that is the hottest topic, I think, and you see that in the shops, and I know that we hear about it all the time. People have genuinely turned back to vegetable gardening as a primary expression of gardening, not just as a little corner thing that they do in their landscape. And this is really significant in terms of the big changes we're seeing in the gardening scene, right, Daphne?
Absolutely, and we are getting a lot of requests for that type of information at Extension, and so we've responded by trying to put together a series of classes that are more for people who want to do a little backyard gardening, but then maybe sell that produce at a farmer's market, or maybe herbs. You can grow a lot of herbs in a very small space of your backyard and still sell them or have a small greenhouse. And so we have seen a lot of people become more interested in that. I got a call just the other day from someone who had bought a new property and wanted to plant blackberries. Blackberries do very well here, so it's a very great crop for us to explore as homeowners or as someone who has a little bit of property and wants to grow some local food, which is also a very, very big deal here in this community.
Yeah, and this gets to Trisha's point of kind of weaving edibles into the landscape.
Absolutely.
Right in with the ornamentals.
And they could be beautiful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not unattractive at all.
Yeah, and I think this is just change we've witnessed, but I know you all practice it as well. But really makes a significant difference as well in terms of the way that you experience the garden and the way that you're able to share it. And you've all referenced that, you know.
You know, some restaurants are doing it too.
Yeah.
And they're doing an excellent job. I consult with one of them. And it's just really nice to have the chef go out there and harvest some vegetables and walk the 50 feet back to the kitchen and start serving them. They're excited about it, we're excited about it, and their customers are excited about it.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing more local buying of produce, the family farms coming back around here. And you can't eat St. Augustine, you know, so you may as well put a vegetable garden out there. When somebody says, I've got a disease in my yard, my answer is good. We have another thing to do out there now.
That's great, and I like that approach. And you know, and again, speaking of change, what we do with turf is a huge issue, and it's probably one of the #1 questions we get after the edibles, is making transitions in turf. And you know, I will say that I caution people, because turf, on one hand, is easy maintenance, really, on a lot of levels.
If you like to mow, and
if you like to mow, right. And a lot of people
it doesn't require a lot of thought.
It doesn't exactly.
It does not require a lot of knowledge or thought.
That's right. But finding that right balance of turf and other kinds of elements in the garden beds, hardscape, you name it, that is another big topic. And this kind of helps us transition to that whole notion of balance as well. So let's talk about this aspect of it a little bit.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. People, if they're going to rip out their grass, I think they should start slowly and put in maybe a small area of native plants, and so they learn what they're doing. Native plants, as Trisha pointed out, gardens are not static, so those plants do require pruning. They do require some amount of water, although not a lot. So people, I just caution people to really get as much information as possible before they make a huge change and invest a ton of money in a brand new 1,000 square foot landscape that they don't know how to deal with.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
And that gets to the topic of balance too, because you don't want to swing from one extreme to the other and not know what to expect and what the maintenance is going to be required of you. You know, Trisha.
Well, and having the right plants for your soil is so important too, and for the amount of sun and shade that you have, and for the amount of care that you can give too is important. I mean, some of the natives can be a little bit aggressive, so you need to choose wisely if you don't have that much time for maintenance. But I think that just the benefit of seeing the birds and the butterflies and the bees on your native plants, you never see that on your St. Augustine. So that's a big plus in my book.
Right. And John, this is, we're talking about finding balance here, and Trisha's talked about the soil in her last response. I want to come back around to that with you, because to me, when I think about balance, the most important balance that it can exist in the garden is what's below your feet. It's what you're setting your garden into. And a lot of folks who watch the show are brand new to gardening and are looking for some basic advice about what do I do to prepare. And I remember just years ago when I was starting a new garden in Austin, after gardening here for 16 years, I swore I would never garden in this community again unless I started with the soil that I had built. And so I'm sure you have some great advice on this.
Well, the other half of the plant's in the soil.
Yeah.
So we have to address that half of the plant also. And the health of the soil is reflected in the health of the plant. Good organic matter is so important. It helps you retain moisture. If we have this problem of lack of rain, you've got a sponge in the ground there. It keeps nutrients in place so that they don't leach out into our environment like we know that they do. So opening up that soil, getting some air in there, providing drainage are key. And homemade compost is the best. If you want to have a garden out there, make your own compost. But before you go down that path, I suggest a soil test. You don't know where you're going unless you've done a soil test. And you don't know where you've arrived in 2 years unless you do another one. Don't just keep throwing things at the garden. So open it up with some good organic matter. There's a technique called double digging. If we're going to stay in these dry conditions, double digging is the best way to prepare a garden. And that should be researched also. It's very fine. So making our own home compost, we know what's in it. So that's the best way to do it. We're recycling from the house. It goes into the garden where it belongs, because these are food scraps. They should be back in the earth where they belong. And, you know, planting the right plants in the right season enhance the soil in that the performance at that time is really spectacular. So, you know, there's nothing more important than a good, healthy soil, and the nutrients have to be in balance.
Yeah.
You know, for example, being out of balance is, some people think that Epsom salts are the answer to everything. So every time there's a problem, we kind of tend to think, well, let's throw some Epsom salts at it. Well, when they get out of balance, it's very tough to fix it, because they have a ratio with calcium that the two work together. But if we keep throwing something like that at it, it gets out of balance. And that's why I think the soil test is our guide, and we know exactly what to put in there and how much to put in there. And when you get that balance, and microorganisms, just a healthy living soil, and you can't beat it. And so for the new gardener, if they focus on that, besides the sunny space in the yard, they can do it. But the soil at the Formula One track, and being that horrible, give it 7 years to make a change, because it's not going to happen overnight.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about the nutrients, as John pointed out, it's about the texture. So when you talked about adding compost, that only adds some nice nutrients for your microbes, but it helps you change your texture over time, because as John said, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and that's why I also think that the rock minerals and sands are so important in our area as well. For a lot of the plants that I like to garden with, the things that really are more desert-like, and from the western edge of the hill country, if you plant them in the clay soils, and we have an occasional monsoon, which we will have these drought years, but we'll also have monsoons, then you can lose those plants if you don't have good drainage. So that's one of the supplements I really most value in my gardening is the granite sands and other kinds of mineral sands as well. I think it really helps, again, achieve the right balance for the plants. If you blend that with compost, for example, you can have a really fine planting bed.
It's not just NPK, like you're saying. It's a big balance that's essential.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, focusing on the newbies out there, you know, we've all of us here, I think, accumulated in terms of gardening experience. We're centenarians. You know, we've had our years together as gardeners, and you know, and as you get older and you experience things in the garden, you know, you make adjustments for yourself. If you're going to talk to a new gardener about, say, we have a family that has a brand new backyard that's kind of a blank slate, and they're anxious to do something that, you know, that's sustainable, that's responsible, but it's also going to be something that they will love for a long time. What would you tell them as appropriate first steps?
I would say to start with your soil and to look, as Trisha has pointed out, to look at the sun, how much sun an area gets, not just in one season, but throughout the year. Because one mistake I made in my new landscape was I planted a hedgerow of shrubs, and they all did fabulous for 3 of the seasons, and then it got to summer, and 3 of them did fine and 2 of them didn't, and that's because the last 2 were in a line where they got more sun than the rest because of the angle of the sun during the summer. So it's not just one season that you need to pay attention to what's going on in your landscape, it's the entire year, and just pay attention to what nature tells you when you're out in your yard. And it will help you make those decisions about what to do with the space.
And then what that tells me is don't rush into creating the garden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take a small area, start with that. Don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah.
I always tell people to mark out the garden and then set the oven timer and go out every hour to 2 hours and look at during the day and see what kind of sun, because sometimes even just the shade of the house makes it too shady in the afternoon for vegetables. So those kinds of things are important. But something I tried year before last was a lasagna garden. I'd never done that. I wanted to make a new garden bed, and I didn't even dig up the grass. I put, you know, paper and cardboard down and did the lasagna garden. Now that year was so dry, the next summer was so dry, I just kind of gave up the garden there, but I kept adding my compost materials from the kitchen into that lasagna bed. And so this year, it was fabulous garden soil. It's just some of the nicest garden soil, and I didn't import anything into that
No,
bed.
you didn't actually use pasta here. I just want to make people understand. The lasagna bed is a layered approach.
A layered approach, and
right.
I want to try the keyhole garden next because that was something we talked talked about on Central Texas Garden. I thought that was really a fascinating idea. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give that a try.
I think, and John has talked about square foot gardening as well. I think high impact and small space for vegetable gardening might be the biggest thing in terms of food production in the future.
And that's very low input too. I mean, the lasagna garden is it's a lot of recycling.
John, your tips for newbies.
Well, I agree with both of these comments about examining where the light is and the different seasons. And if anybody could do this, spend a year without starting the landscape. Paint the house, do some other things, and then watch every day and every season. The season changes every 2 weeks for us here. Watch that.
Not in summer.
And then you can make some important decisions about where the sun really is. Does this tree drop its leaves? So when they come in and visit with me, and I get them every day, they're either asking about their landscape, and we talk to them about low water use plants, and we talk to them, I do, about their vegetable garden, and some recommended seeds. They're not all doing well here, and I'd like to see more sustainable seeds, heirloom seeds. I like to suggest chickens in the backyard. They're legal here in Austin, you know. It's a big picture that we're looking at. Low water use landscape, it can be beautiful. Go to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, take your camera with you. They paid some architect thousands of dollars to make those designs. Just take your camera, they got the names on them, take that home, and it's very easy to duplicate when you don't know this area very well, and you're on your way.
And I think I wanted to play off that just for a minute. If I was going to talk to a newbie, I would say go out and steal ideas.
They're free.
They're free, and there's nothing original about any real garden. We all borrow from our ancestors and borrow from our neighbors and the people who've come before us. There are no new ideas under the sun. Go out there and look at gardens.
Well, and I tell people if they're in an area that deer are a problem, go out and see what your neighbors are having success with, and then you'll know what the deer are not eating.
Right.
I like to teach them also in person. I've got grounds around the store deliberately. So that, and the newest garden that we put up there is all the native grasses, all the bunch grasses of different types. You can see what little and big blue stem looks like, and the Lindheimers. I've got a buffalo lawn out there. You want to see what a buffalo lawn looks like, mowed or unmowed? You can come out and see that. There's some new blends. I've got them there. You can begin to make up your mind. And this is my all Texas grass garden. And of course, if it's going to be all Texas, right in the middle of it, I put Willie Nelson's guitar, and you got to come see that too.
Okay. Well, we'll make a point of doing that.
Well, I think all of us have demonstration gardens. Trisha's fabulous garden out at the spa, and we at the extension office, we have a nice demonstration garden, and we use it when we teach classes as well. So I think John's right. That's the best way is to show people actually in person. And
there's so many great garden tours all the time here in Austin too.
And we're very fortunate, not just here in this community, but now a growing sensation all across the country of the garden tours. Austin, hyperactive, I would say, at this front, which we're so fortunate. All sorts of great things happening all the time. We have just enough time for some concluding thoughts, and we've talked about the things that we're adapting to. We're talking about change in the garden. We're talking about things people ought to think about if they're newbies. Are there any kind of things that you would say as we close out here, lessons you've learned that you would never do again?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. There are a lot of things that I would probably never do again. Where do I even start?
Let me start, and then I'll give you a moment, because this is on my mind. Years ago, I planted in the garden space where I'm working now. I'm trying to restore this garden. I planted a lot of plants without really thinking about how invasive they would be. And some are native, some are not. But boy, it's so much labor to come back in afterwards and control these pests. And now some of them, are not described as pests in the garden books, but you better be careful about what you plant and what kind of conditions they're going to be in, because they can ramble in places you never thought. So that I would start there.
That is absolutely true. For me, I would say along the same lines, I wouldn't let my weeds get so out of control. 2 summers ago when it was so hot, I couldn't even walk out into my backyard.
Yeah.
Barely. I would go out at night to water the 10 plants that I really wanted to save that I'd recently planted. And I stopped watering the grass, as everyone did. And I wish I'd watered it at least a little bit to keep it kind of healthy so I could keep those weeds in check, because they're really bad now.
All right. Trisha, any thoughts?
Well, I guess one, never till Bermuda. You know, if you were trying to do a garden area, you never want to till the Bermuda in. And I think another one is I brought in some topsoil that was, you know, supposed to be, it was okay topsoil to build a septic system, but unfortunately my garden helpers put it as fill around my vegetable garden, and it had nematodes.
Oh,
Or not nematodes.
There is no
very,
topsoil.
very briefly,
So-
John, we only have a few seconds.
Okay. The mistake that I don't want to make again is build too small a greenhouse for myself in the backyard.
Yeah.
I've got to do another one now.
That's
So
not
that's
cheap.
something to keep in mind, and
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
not cheap.
Not cheap.
Well, on that note, a lot of accumulated garden wisdom here. I certainly value and treasure your participation in this program and in our gardening community, the difference you've all made for a long time, very selflessly, and we really appreciate you being part of the Central Texas Gardener family.
Oh, we love being here, I think.
I know,
Yes,
it's great.
definitely.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next time in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.